things out rapid fire. I want to start right away with what I think one of the first issues. And for seniors housing and care, some would say we've been somewhat in denial about the idea of all the polls showing and people saying, I just want to stay in my home. Now you've talked about technology which could significantly help people to be able to stay in their home longer. So you've also said, though, it isn't necessarily have to be viewed as a threat. Should people go out of here? Oh, my God, you know, I got to change my pro formas? Or how should they be responding to this explosion in ways to help people age better or longer in their homes?
I think if people go ahead and say, look, I just need to do what I'm doing, but faster and more efficiently, then yes, I think you should go and change your numbers. Because frankly, the technology itself will enable people to age in place longer. I think what it begs, though, is a greater discussion on the business model of senior housing in general. Not about its efficiency or what technology to invest in, but consumer-facing companies that do well and lead their markets excite and delight their customer. And I'd like to integrate my colleagues that just spoke the last 2 sessions. What's the vision that is more compelling than then staying in my dusty house with 35 years of junk in it? What is it? Right now we're selling independence, we're selling safety, we're selling health, worry-free. It's not selling because until you're in that position of help, I've fallen, I can't, I am independent, I am worry-free, and I am healthy. So the technology might be a new way to create new services so I get to know you, I get to trust you, and then eventually maybe I'll come to you.
Well, what strategic change would you then, just taking that a step further, if you were to give one piece of advice to all the developers and providers out here in terms of a strategic change in the model to be more responsive to boomers, what might it be?
I am fully aware and appreciative that what I'm about to say changes essentially the source of funding and the like that builds these properties. But I would really move much harder into creating branded services with other providers beyond the facility that you own and operate. And the boomers, frankly, are not benchmarking you off of other competitors in assisted living. Frankly, they're not even benchmarking you off of living in their own homes. How were they treated the last time they were in retail? How were they treated the last time they were in finance or banking? How is that experience setting what their expectations are? So I would go out and find other companies that are talking to the boomers, engaging with the boomers, and finding a way to either market with them, co-branding, or white label it.
You've talked about, in other places, you've talked about we think wrongly when we think of tech companies just as tech companies, that they're really tech-enabled platforms, and that this then enables partnerships. So picking up on your partnership idea, expand on what you mean by that when we think about a Google and Amazon and so forth.
Yeah, it's a shame these days you can't have a single presentation without mentioning Apple or something like that. It's almost like stock material. But you have to ask yourself, what is the value of Apple? Now, I'm one of the people who loves their design and everything else. But if you look at what they're really pitching, they're selling an ecosystem. Yeah, they're selling the device, but they're selling the iTunes, they're selling the cloud, they're selling an ecosystem of services around it. The sharing economy basically is life on demand by app. It's not the technology itself that's being sold, but frankly, we're selling the old-fashioned, somebody's going to come to my house and fix that doorknob, or someone's going to be able to take me to get that ice cream cone. So what are those basic human needs that we're trying to fulfill? And by the way, just as the other speaker said, needs are easy. It's the wants that you've got to anticipate. And that's not just where the money is, that's where the quality of life is.
I would guess, though, that many folks, and many folks here, may have thought of the sharing economy as a millennial lifestyle. Yeah. Talk about that in terms of whether it's seniors' fear of technology. Yeah, that'll happen, but that'll be the 26-year-olds doing that in their apartments. But that's not going to be the 77-year-old doing that.
We had a great event at the AgeLab looking at the sharing economy and what it means for older adults. And yes, I was biased that way as well, since I spend my day with Gen Z and millennials, thinking that this was all about the kids wanting to, not own anything and have it all for free. Guess what, folks? What we're finding is that the 50 plus and the 60 plus, they're kind of looking over their kids and grandkids' shoulder going, that's a lot easier, isn't it? it's a lot more hassle-free than it could be. So all of a sudden we're seeing as a lifestyle for those few that do downsize, gee, all of a sudden an Avalon Properties to rent and getting rid of the car to have a zip car and having food delivered is not about assisted living or something that the kids are doing. It's just a lot more fun and easy. So what we're finding now is that not only are, shall we say, the 60 plus in high demand to work for Uber because they provide quality driving experience, or the 20% of Airbnb hosts that get the highest ratings are over age 65, we're finding that this is a new emerging lifestyle, which, by the way, think about what this means for the future of wealth. We're seeing a value shift in the United States. Having it all the experience, and owning none of it.
Well, you've talked about and illustrated several different technologies that might be disruptive as well as enabling to seniors' housing industry. But what about social factors you see that might either be a threat or an opportunity for the sector as we look over this 10-year time horizon?
Sure, there are many social factors, and the neat thing about my lab is we've got social scientists, psychologists, and engineers. One of the things that I find very difficult to balance is that if you think about senior housing today, one of the value propositions you quite often see is we're going to provide community. We're going to provide connectivity. Does anyone remember a book written by a sociologist at Harvard? That's the art school up the river from us, I think. Yeah, Putnam wrote a great book on bowling alone. The baby boomers, especially the first rung of baby boomers, spent an entire 70 years of their life running away from being part of any community. They're dropping out of large affinity groups. They're not joining community organizations. When was the last time you saw the numbers of Rotary and Kiwanis going through the roof? And all of a sudden now we're pitching community. So as a social factor, that community is going to have to be very small, very local, and very personal to be able to make it true community. The second part, and I think one of the previous speakers mentioned it, the future is gray. It's small, but by the way, it's all female. She's making the decisions. She's dumping her husband. Divorce rates are 700% higher than they were since 1960 for the 50 plus. So women are making profoundly decisions of where they want to go, probably with their girlfriends and not their husbands, or maybe with a new husband, let's put it that way. The idea of lower levels of trust. And I guess the last thing is, we were talking about the millennials. We had far fewer children than previous generations. For me to buy into one of your communities, I've got to sell my suburban McMansion. Millennials are not getting married. They're not having kids. So why the heck would they want to buy a couple 1,000-foot house in the suburbs with a good school system? How am I going to free up that capital? So those are three social economic factors that should keep us up at night.
Let's pursue one of them just for a moment. The mistrust-distrust factor. Any thoughts that you have on that in terms of the marketing and the messaging of seniors housing and care in terms of the trustedness, the mistrust,
I am so glad you brought that up. One of the biggest reasons why I think you need to build a pipeline over the fence to create a relationship before someone needs to start shopping for housing is the trust factor. I want you to think about this. In 1978 to 79, the high school seniors of that era, me, basically answered the following question. In general, other people can be trusted. Only 32% of my graduating class around the country said, yeah, other people can be trusted. And of course the boomers, the folks who said trust no one over 30, now that they're all 30 times 2, the answer is trust no one. But here's something else. The millennials and Gen Z are starting off at lower levels of trust than their parents did at the same age. So who do we trust? We trust primarily other people like me. No, not bald-headed geeks at MIT. No, other people that are facing the same problem I'm having. We go online, we go in person. How are you making a decision? How do I trust you? And trust, a good engineering definition of trust is predictability. That pipeline into the community gives me a chance to get to know you, get to know that you're a local entity, and now I'm developing some levels of trust.
So establishing credibility.
Credibility over the long haul.
Trust.
Yeah, and by the way, with the female consumer.
So if you're speaking, and you are now, to half of this audience, to the investor community, what insights would you share? Should they be wildly optimistic about this huge demographic of the boomer market coming, given their numbers and their obvious needs? Or should they go, oh, gee, This just inverts all of our pro formas.
By default, I tend to go on the side of optimism because that's where you get the emotion and the energy to do something great. You know, innovation is about putting useful ideas into practice. So I would say be optimistic, but be optimistic as you're shopping not just for good management teams, not just for good properties and good locations, but good marketing teams. Teams that have got visions that truly excite that consumer in ways. You know, the trouble with the older consumer, if you want to call it a trouble or a problem, is that we have seen, I'm going to use the royal we, so much technology, so many services, and so many experiences that it's hard to get us excited. It's like, yeah, I've seen that before. The challenge for the industry is no longer technology. It's no longer real estate price and the cost of capital. It's going to be, what is that next big thing? So if I was an investor, I would see those numbers of population. I would see all the assets that are out there and say, I need to shop for the folks that are truly offering something that's a wow factor that gets me to pause. And that is what I'll do before I look at the Excel spreadsheet.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Your observations are terrific.